71104.com. Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, Lord, stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. A preaching and crying with my mind. My Lord, he said, stay on freedom. I'm preaching and crying with my mind. Stay on freedom. I'm preaching and crying with my mind. My Lord, he said, stay on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah. How you doing? Do I sound like I've been drinking the tea? I've been drinking a lot of tea, and it was so good. I drink that good old ginger tea every day. My wife makes a wonderful, wonderful meal and keeps his old bones working and his boy alive. Welcome to the Richard James Show. I'm in a good mood because things are beginning to happen. Issues that were in the back of the burner are now coming to the front of the burner. Today, we're going to look at reparations. Reparation. Payback for all of the ills and sins that have been committed against our people over the years. Maybe I shouldn't say all of them, because that'd be a heck of a task. Interesting. The governor of California is pro-reparations. Can you believe that? The white governor of the largest state population-wise in the union is pro-reparations. I don't know of any other governor throughout the United States of America that have come out with such a position. And I'm waiting to hear Joe Biden to take a position on reparations. Now, it's a very complex issue, a complex problem. Recently, we had the death of the Queen of England. And there was sadness and mourning throughout the world. She was the same age as my mama. When my mama passed, she was 96 years old. The Queen lived to be 96. And some people of African descent planned to attend the funeral and are in mourning over the death of the Queen of England. Some people of African descent said, no, not me. Because they look back at the colonial past and the current exploitation of people of color. And they said, why should we be mourning white folks' queen? The ones that incarcerated and put in the concentration camp freedom fighters in Kenya. In fact, they did that. Now, some of the present ruling class, and that's one of the problems we have in Africa, have benefited from the independence movement and their relationship with their old colonizers financially. But there are some mothers, some sons, and cousins that remember the thousands of Kenyans who were slaughtered by the British and placed in the concentration camps. So they don't mourn the death of the Queen. First of all, everybody's going to die. Only person I know that ever came back, a gentleman by the name of Jesus Christ. Other than that, all the folks I know went in the ground, stayed. We have a situation here in the United States. Of all of the slave countries, to my knowledge, the information that I have, none was so brutal and more racist than the United States of America. Interesting, the birthplace of democracy, the land of the free, and the home of the brave. More racist than France, more racist than Britain. I don't know who's the most racist. I don't know who would win that contest, because the Belgians would certainly give them a run for their money, with over 1 million Africans slaughtered after they murdered the prime minister that was duly elected, Patrice Lumumba. I don't know who would get that crown. But there is a class of people, freedom-loving people, who believe in love, who believe in justice, who believe in democracy. And see, I strongly believe in the principles of democratic government. There are some people, both white and black, that believe, hey, we've got to make amends for our racist past. We've got to make amends not only for our racist past, but about our racist present. Shame that a small minority of individuals can make it terrible for all of us. Now look at our police officers. Difficult job. Extremely difficult job being a police officer. Some of the finest people I know. Have mercy, hold on, liberals. Some of the finest people I know, and some of my closest friends, and this is a fact, it's not, he's my friend kind of thing, are police officers. They have a dangerous job. They have a very important job where we have crime spiraling out of control. I don't believe in that nonsense, defund the police. That's the most ridiculous thing. You shouldn't let that garbage drop out of your mouth. It's crazy. You think it's bad now, you defund the police and don't have the police walking the street, you see how bad it can really get. But you do have some sick people who enjoy violence on some of these police forces. And they have beaten their way to the top, causing brain concussion, destroying families, killing young men that are still in their teenage years for no apparent reason other than their ego and their racist attitude. So we need to stop that. We need to make sure, first of all, that we hire people who are well mentally. Don't hire sick folks to guard and protect. Because who are they going to guard and protect? We need to monitor the police. We need to bring closer relationship between police and community. So when we talk about the dialogue about reparation, bringing about change, payback, you can't separate that from how we are being treated right now. Yeah, we spent several hundred years in slavery. That's a fact. We lost thousands and thousands of our people coming across the ocean in the Middle Passes. But I got some problems right here now. So when we design a package to uplift people of color, and we got to talk not only just about Black folks, but we got to talk about some Native Americans who were robbed of their land. Some folks don't only want to hear it. They only want to hear their own ethnic group. But too bad. Turn to another channel if you don't want to hear what I have to say. We want to make sure that all people are treated fairly. Now, some reparations have been given out. Japanese Americans were treated as if they're not human, pushed into concentration camps, robbed of their businesses, robbed of their property and their land. And they got some payback. I think it took them half a century to get it. Asians sometimes are discriminated against and lied about and blamed for things that's not their problem. And this darn virus, they want to blame the Chinese. You think the Chinese created the virus so they can die with it? That is the dumbest, most racist thing I ever heard. Stupid. People start attacking Asians because of a disease that affects all human beings. Crazy. That's what bigotry is all about. We got to come up with a design package to bring people together. White, poor, rich, Asian, Native American, African American. All God's children have blood running through their veins and deserve equal opportunity and freedom, and to be treated like they're human beings. I am very much, now that I really understand the concept, pro reparations, but preparation for reparations has to be a design plan. It has to be woven into a system of doing things. And in order to have reparations or anything that's positive, we're going to have a seat at the table. We're going to have to be a part of the decision-making process. The Black Caucus now is lifting up bills for reparations. We've got to have enough votes to get those bills passed. So we got to take the system that's presently there, take it, modify it, and get the power of the vote and of the ballot to be able to bring about the kind of changes that we want. You hear what I'm saying? And if you want to end racism and discrimination and bigotry, then you can't be a bigot. Leave your bigotry in your back pocket. Hear me. If you want to change things, make it better for everybody, then you got to pull together. And you don't just hate a person simply because the color is different, because their nose is shaped a little different, because their hair is straight, or because of that, for any ridiculous, foolish reason. Clean out your mind, lift up your spirit. And we want reparations. We also want change. Because even if you gave me a check for my past work and you continue to exploit me, then what good is it? Reparations without change, without uplifting that bloodstained banner that we talk about, without bringing people together, without teaching people how to love each other and to respect each other, ain't worth a tinker's woo, you know what? It ain't worth nothing. It's really not worth a tinker. I got a video that we lifted up off of YouTube. We didn't create it, but it's a wonderful debate on the issue of reparations. And this young man that's in this video, young African-American man, is a brilliant young man who's done some thorough research. We're going to take a look at that. We won't be able to see the whole thing because it's even longer than my television show, but we'll see some positive things about it, and we'll discuss it just a little bit more. All right? Keep that in mind. We're looking at reparations.
Out there online on him. Arguing against the proposition is Richard Epstein, the Lawrence A. Tisch Professor of Law at the NYU School of Law. He's also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. He's also a senior lecturer for the University of Chicago. He is also the author of several articles arguing against Black reparations, and you can find a lot of his publications online as well. All right, a little housekeeping here. For those of you watching the live stream right now, this broadcast, I'd like to bring your attention to the link right there at our pre-debate poll on reparations. We want to know what you think, so please fill out that poll. That'll be closing here in just a few minutes. You'll also have a chance at the end of this debate to cast your vote on reparations after hearing from speakers from both sides. Now, there will be 4 rounds to today's debate. And I want to explain the format as to how we're going to do this. Right, our first round, in round 1, each speaker will have 10 minutes to lay out their position on reparations, starting with the affirmative side. And then we'll move on to round 2. Now, in round 2, each speaker will then have 5 minutes to reply to the points of the other speaker and also clarify their position. In round 3, the speakers will have an opportunity to actually ask each other questions and speak directly to one another's points and also to one another's clarifications. Now, in the final round, the audience, you will play a big role in this. You will have an opportunity to ask our speakers questions. You can also enter your questions there at any time through the chat there on the U of H live stream site, and you can put those questions there as soon as we start speaking or as soon as you start hearing speakers from both sides. So don't be afraid to go ahead and put those questions in right there on the U of H live stream site as we begin the debate. All right, here we go, friends. We're going to start with round 1, our opening statement on the affirmative side. Mr. Ray, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chauncy. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Definitely want to thank ABC 13 in Houston, as well as the Hobby School of Public Affairs for hosting this, as well as to my debater here. I want to start off with a quote. "We have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come marked insufficient funds, where we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt." Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made that quote in his classic I Have a Dream speech, which he gave in 1963 in Washington, D.C. Dr. King was firmly in favor of reparations. So I want to be clear about why we're here today. We are here because a debt is owed, and reparations are about paying that debt. Given the lingering legacy of slavery on the racial wealth gap, the monetary value we know that was placed on the enslaved Blacks, the fact that other groups have received reparations, and the fact that Blacks were originally awarded reparations only to have them rescinded, provide overwhelming evidence that it is time to pay reparations to the descendants of enslaved Black people. Making the American dream an equitable reality demands that the same U.S. government that denied wealth to Blacks restore that deferred wealth through reparations to their descendants. I want to address a few questions right up front. First, why are reparations necessary? Some broad statistics from the National Museum for African American History and Culture in DC. If you haven't gone yet, you should do that. But some of these stats are of import here related to American slavery. First, 12.5 million Black people were shipped in chains from Western Africa to the Americas. About 15% of the enslaved died during transport, mostly due to brutal physical treatment and suffocation, but also through acts of resistance, such as fighting back, jumping into the Atlantic, and refusing to eat. Here goes the monetary values that's important. $25 million was the amount of bank credit issued from mortgages that used enslaved Blacks as collateral to purchase the state of Louisiana in 1859. We know about the Louisiana Purchase, but that particular detail is oftentimes left off. $29 million was the value placed on cotton produced by enslaved Blacks in 1822. 1822, $29 million. $250 million was the value placed on cotton produced by enslaved Blacks in 1861. We can see the inflation rate related to cotton. And we also know that into the late 1800s and early 1900s, that as cotton production started to wane, lynchings also increased, which were correlated, obviously, as people were acting out in terms of their economic woes. Here's the big number. Over $3 billion was the value assigned to the physical bodies of enslaved Black Americans to be used as free labor in production. That was in 1860. This was more money at the time that was invested in factories and railroads combined. Slavery also enriched white slave owners and their descendants, and it fueled the country's economy while suppressing wealth building strategies for the enslaved. The United States has yet to compensate the descendants of enslaved Black Americans for their labor. Slavery also disrupted families, as 1 in 3 marriages were split up due to slaves being sold, and 1 in 5 children were separated from their parents. So again, when we define reparations, reparations is a system of redress for egregious injustices. And reparations is not a foreign act to the United States. Native Americans have received land and billions of dollars for various benefits and programs for being forcibly exiled from their native lands. That should have happened. Japanese Americans received $1.5 billion for being interned during World War II. That also should have happened. And additionally, the United States, via the Marshall Plan, helped to ensure that Jews receive reparations for the Holocaust, including making various investments over time, when in 1952, West Germany agreed to pay $3.45 billion in Deutschmarks to Holocaust survivors. That should have happened as well, and the United States should have continued, as they've done, to ensure that those payments are made. This is the bottom line. Black Americans are the only group that has not received reparations for state-sanctioned racial discrimination, while slavery afforded some white families the ability to accrue tremendous wealth multiple times over. And we should note that slavery was particularly brutal. So as my Brookings colleague, Andre Perry, often says, the United States is not against reparations. It is just against reparations for Black people. Accordingly, it's important to note a few missed opportunities. The big one is 40 acres and a mule. People hear that term, they oftentimes don't know where it comes from. We'll see right after the Civil War, where finally, based on Juneteenth, we know that some of the last enslaved people found out that they were free down in Texas in Galveston, that this was the first opportunity for the United States to get it right. Union leaders, including General William Sherman, concluded that each Black family should receive 40 acres. Sherman signed what was known as Field Order 15 and allocated 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land that was formerly enslaved land to Black families. Additionally, Black families, each Black family was supposed to receive a mule that was left over from the war, hence 40 acres and a mule. Yet, after President Lincoln was assassinated, President Johnson reversed Field Order 15 and returned land back to slave owners. Instead of giving Blacks the means to support themselves, the federal government empowered former slave owners, including in Washington, D.C., where slave owners were actually paid reparations for lost property, that lost property being formerly enslaved people, and that practice was put in place in nearby states. Many Blacks were then forced to go back and work as sharecroppers on the same land where they were once enslaved. So we see multiple times over how that happens. Let's fast forward to another time period in which it could have happened. Let's talk about the New Deal during the Great Depression, where Franklin Roosevelt was president, one of my favorite presidents, but this was where he got it wrong. President Roosevelt ushered us into what we know to be the middle class today by investing $50 billion in New Deal policies. That's currently estimated to be $50 trillion. There were 2 key policies here dealing with the GI Bill and Social Security. See, this is also for people who try to say, well, my family wasn't around during slavery. Yeah, but Oftentimes, if you're an immigrant, your family was probably around during the time of the Great Depression. And that's of note. When we talk about the GI Bill, there were white soldiers, black soldiers fighting together. Individuals like some of my ancestors who were fighting for our freedoms. And yet when they returned from war, veterans were able to receive money to go to college, money to send their children to college, money to start up businesses, and also money to put down on holds. These were grants that they did not have to pay back that was due them. However, white veterans received that money and black veterans did not. Likewise, when we talk about Social Security, the way that it was originally set up, there were two occupations excluded from Social Security. That was domestic work and farm work. 75% of black people who worked in the South worked in those occupations because black people were still relegated to those jobs just like they were during slavery. That was another opportunity for the United States to get it right, and instead we missed it. So look, as I get ready to close, what should reparations look like? Well, look, we know the monetary value based on put on black people. We know the productivity rate of what was put on them. And we also know that when it comes to thinking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a federal reparations package for Black Americans is in order. This package should include individual and collective public benefits that not only include direct cash payments, but also a focus on education, home ownership, and business ownership in form of a 21st century New Deal. First, education needs to be taken into account. The average white family today has 10 times the amount of wealth as the average black family. And education does little to close that gap. Black college graduates have 7 times less wealth than the average white college graduates. These are people who have done everything people told them to do. So accordingly, based on all the things we know about housing and how equity works, and also the fact that people who attend HBCUs get subprime loans, that we need to focus on 4 and 2 year colleges for tuition payments and also for student loan repayment. Second, when we talk about housing, we know that appraisals are still a big issue. We know about redlining. Accordingly, we know that 50% of people's wealth is oftentimes wrapped up in their homes, wealth that black people can't get, even when they've done everything they were supposed to do. So part of a reparations package should include down payment assistance and also housing revitalization to restore some of these communities. Finally, we need business ownership grants. One thing we know, particularly during COVID, is that a large percentage of black families or black small businesses were completely left out of the initial COVID funding. So much so that 41% of black during COVID, according to a Stanford University study. What needs to happen is management, and then we also need to ensure that small businesses get the type of land that they need. Let me close with another quote. As Congresswoman Barbara Lee stated in her resolution on truth and reconciliation, contemporary social science, medical science, and the rapidly expanding use of artificial intelligence and social media reveal the cost and potential threats to our democracy if we continue to allow unhealed, entrenched divisions to be ignored and exploited. For those wanting to tell their children that they were on the right side of history and did the right thing in this moment, now is the time to truly show your true morality and what it means to be an advocate and what it means to be a true American by paying reparations to Black Americans so that we can finally heal and get past systemic racism.
Mr. Ray, thank you. We want to move to the opening statement on the opposing side. Mr. Epstein, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Let me begin by trying to figure out how we put this in some kind of larger context. What Rashawn has done in this situation is to talk about all the things that happened with respect to the slavery and other situations, as if it were every white person to some extent, every American that was responsible for these things. And there's no particular such discussion there about the complications associated with several factors. One is that if you start looking at the way this history ran, it's very much more complicated than one would start to say. So to begin with the fact of the Civil War, there were several 100,000 Northern American whites who were killed during the Civil War in an effort to end slavery in the South. They have descendants as well. Many of them paid for this in blood. And so the question that one has to ask is whether or not the descendants of those people who did everything they could within their power in order to end the scourge of slavery now owe reparations upon top of the ultimate sacrifice that they made under these circumstances. And I think it's extremely difficult to make that kind of claim. Then, of course, it turns out that there are many Americans who came to this country long after slavery was abolished, many Americans who came and worked very actively in the civil rights movement in order to abolish many of the situations that had taken place. If you start looking at all of those kinds of things, it becomes very hard to say why it is that there's a collective responsibility when it turns out that so many individuals who are part of our polity have done everything that they could in order to come out on the other side of that question. I think the second question that you want to do is to set some measure of Black progress under these circumstances. The figure that I like to use the most in dealing with this issue is the question of life expectancy. And if you take that number in 1900, which is in the period of Jim Crow, average life expectancies of Black individuals was in the neighborhood of 31, 32 years of age. For white people, it was 47, 48 years. That gap has largely closed. And the close, it's not because of the particular programs that created impediments. It's because the vast transformation in American culture in the time that started in 1900 to the present has resulted in an unleashing of Black talent, which essentially has allowed things to equalize in a certain way. Wealth patterns, of course, are different, but so are consumption patterns. And in fact, if you check consumption patterns with respect to white and Black individuals in given kinds of industries, you tend to see a fairly systematic difference in the terms of their willingness to save as opposed to their willingness to spend. That cannot be attributed to something that you want to call systemic, and that's a question of individual choices. All of us are entitled to make them, and if you want higher consumption today, you're going to end up with lower rates of benefits tomorrow. Then what you also have to do on this situation is to compare this to other kinds of situations in which we've had situations of compensation. Rashawn mentions quite properly that there was 40 acres and a mule. This was 40 acres and a mule promised to all the individuals who were slaves at the time that slavery was over. He also mentioned the situation that took place in Germany after the Holocaust, where in fact there were 6 million Jewish people who were killed, and there were probably 1 million survivors in fragmented situations. The compensation that was given was not given to descendants 8 generations later. It was given to the very individuals who had been victimized by these situations. It was well understood that there was no way you could compensate families that were completely wiped out. And the payment for Israel, which was rather substantial at the time, was essentially an effort to try and provide compensation to a nation, which would serve as a rough proxy that you had with respect to the individual losses. We also heard reference made to the situation with respect to the Japanese internment camps, which was another kind of horrific type situation, though no near as bad as slavery. And again, when that took place in 1988, it took place with respect to only those people who were survivors of the particular program. No money under those circumstances was allocated to descendants, many of whom had done very well with respect to their own lives, and it was thought to be utterly inappropriate. It's also clear when you made these kinds of compensation programs, the only thing that you did was to give cash to people or kind benefits to people who were the direct victims of that. Nobody thought that the doctrine of reparations was something which required you to make major structural changes in the way in which one ought to work an economy. And it's here I think I do disagree quite profoundly with Rashawn in the way in which he tries to attribute the difficulties associated with the modern situation. I do not think for the most part that a claim of systematic racism is going to work. In order for that to work, you have to have some systematic racism. And it turns out, if you look in the United States at the height of segregation, lasting until the 1950s and so forth, it was easy to target the people whom you think were wrong. But if you try to figure out today whether or not there's a consensus, the overwhelming power of the diversity movement suggests that there are very few systematic racists in positions of any kind of power or whatsoever. So the question then is, what are you going to attribute some of the differentials to? And I think Rashawn is correct to say that there have been certainly educational deficits and so forth. But if you start going back to the history, what you discover is that the kind of relationships that you had start getting worse after 1950 than they were perhaps 50 years before. So if you take, for example, Black and white unemployment rates in 1948, it turns out that they're roughly equal. That doesn't sound like you need to have reparations for the labor market. You then introduce a minimum wage law. Black labor got lower wages at that time because of lower skill levels. And now, in effect, the minimum wage law started to change the distribution of Black and white unemployed workers. And so what you then do is you have the situation today where there are very strong differences. So the question is, do you want to attribute this to slavery or systematic racism? No, I think what you want to do is attribute this kind of behavior to the sort of well-intentioned legislation that sometimes backfires when you start to put it into effect. This is true of a large number of particular programs. And so if you wanted to think, for example, about zoning type situations, these are generally thought to be highly attractive, but the net effect of many zoning laws has made it impossible to builders to put up apartment houses of modest means in areas close to public transportation, which would allow people to get themselves to work. And so what I think you want to do is not think first about reparations as a problem for this situation, which is going to create real differences of opinion as to how much is owed and who is going to be eligible. I think what you first want to do is to see what kinds of barriers that you have towards progress, which can be removed. And the advantage of doing it by way of removal is that it doesn't require you to have a very rancorous debate as to how much taxes have to be paid, who is going to get which kind of benefit, what the total levels are going to be, what the budget is, who is going to be eligible. I saw one story about a person who claims to be, and I'm sure it's true, a descendant of a slave on the one side and a white person on the other side. Do they owe reparations to themselves? I think if you can clean this thing up by essentially improving opportunities, this would be better. Let me give you a kind of a figure, which I think sort of helps make this point a little bit clearer. You start looking at labor performance in minority communities and so forth. It turns out they do better under Donald Trump than they do under Barack Obama. Why is this? Because Trump was essentially less of a regulator on these domestic issues than Obama was. And if you're less of a regulator, you're going to get rid of the taxes and other barriers to entry. And low-income workers will do much better when these barriers are lifted, because they constitute a very large fraction of their wages, than people who are on the other side of the distribution. And so therefore, again, a program of market liberalization is going to start to achieve this. And the same thing could be said in virtually every other market that you want to talk about. We talk about health difficulties and so forth. Let me again mention one of the serious problems. In 1912, there was something known as the Flexner Report, put together by a very distinguished physician at Johns Hopkins University. And what they advocated was for very high standards for medical schools. The net consequence of that was to close down large fractions of the Black medical schools that had existed and even thrived under a system of segregation. And so this is a classic illustration where a well-intentioned informer starts to create the very kinds of difficulties that we start to avoid. I am a classical liberal. I don't believe in no government. I do believe in a strong government that does certain things. But I think programs that are put into place that are trying to improve the lot of any group by taxing one in order to give to another, for whatever motivation, will in the end backfire and leave everybody worse off than they were before. So as I start to look at this particular situation, I think what we should do, and I guess I have about a minute, is that right, Chauncy?
Yes,
is that you want to look also at some of the achievements so you get a better perspective of this. It took a lot of guts to get John Brown v. Board of Education through. Not at the time, it was not an easy decision. It took a lot of work to get the 1964 Civil Rights Act through, the Voting Acts right of 1965, which made a huge difference. And I think what you want to do is to celebrate the success of some of these programs. So where there were systematic exclusions from the polls all the way through the 1950s and 60s, by the time you get to the 2010s and 20s, the level of Black participation in many districts is higher than that of white participation. This suggests that we've done something and we've done something right. So rather than, I think, constantly concentrate our attention on the deficits that exist, I think we have to have a more balanced approach, which starts to look at some of the benefits that have been obtained. And so with that, I turn it back to you, Chauncy. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Epstein, thank you so much. And for our people joining us here for this debate, once again, I want to remind you, if you have any questions for either of our speakers here this evening, you can just put it right there in the chat for the U of H live stream. We want to go now to round two, starting with the affirmative response and clarification to what Mr. Epstein said. You have 5 minutes. I'll hand it back over to you, Mr. Ray.
All right, thank you. So, I always find it interesting in America that we always try to pat ourselves on the back for just doing the right thing. That's kind of how this conversation goes. That's what I essentially just heard. I want to make a few points. First, this is not about who has done well, meaning Black people have done well. This is about a debt being paid. When you go to the hospital and there is an accident and someone is accidentally killed in forms of malpractice, the debt paid does not matter whether the family has money or not, whether or not they save or not. It is about addressing the wrong. That's what this is about. For some reason with Black people, we always move the needle. We got to stay on track. We're talking about a debt that is owed. Let's talk about who should pay. Well, this is the big thing. This is not about individuals. This is about a nation. When money was paid out to Jews from the Holocaust, Germany paid that out. When money was paid out to Japanese Americans who were interned, the United States paid that out. Individuals do not pay that out. But part of what happens is it's difficult for people to separate their own individual identity from the United States as a nation. And that's one of the problems that we must do. The other thing is every white person was not responsible for Japanese internment, but the United States paid it, not the people, the United States. Again, every German was not part of the Holocaust. I spent time in Germany. I taught at the University of Mannheim. I studied what was happening there and how they went about healing themselves. The United States is quite far behind that. The other thing is there were people who came after World War II, and their tax money was paid for Jewish Americans, which, mind you, for Japanese Americans who were interned, their reparations did not come through until 1988. See, we have to be clear about the history that this wasn't something that was happening immediately. Let me go to 3 other points. First, let's talk about savings. Research actually documents that Black people are actually more frugal with their money. They just have less wealth. Irregardless of that, that really doesn't even matter because we're talking about a debt that's owed. Like, you don't think about allocating money for somebody who has some kind of malpractice accident on whether or not they're going to save the money or not. We only do that with Black people. The other thing is when it comes to systemic racism is unfortunately a part of American society. Calling the way that Dr. Epstein mentioned, I think used the term systematic racist as if they are individuals. That's not what we're talking about here. Systemic racism is not part of individuals. And as that Dr. Eduardo Bonilla Silva would say, that racism can exist without racists. This is about racism operating on a systemic level. I'm going to try to take 60 to 75 seconds and really try to summarize this so that people understand what's happening here. Quick sociological note. Racism operates on 3 primary levels: an individual level, a meso level, and a macro level. I'll focus on the 2 polarizing ends. On the individual level, that's the way people primarily view racism, as if a person is engaging in racism against somebody else. That happens, sure. What we're talking about, though, is the way that racism is baked into our policies, our rules, our laws, and our regulations. I'll give you a few examples. Let's take the fact that if you just happen to live in a predominantly Black neighborhood, your house is instantly worth about $50,000 less. It can be the same builder, it can be built at the same time, and in fact, you can have it appraised, and it will appraise for less than it costs to build. That actually just happened in Prince George's County, which happens to be the most affluent Black African-American county in the United States. If it happens here, it's happening everywhere. This isn't about what people are doing that they're supposed to be doing. Another thing, let's go down to Georgia and talk about the trial of the McMichaels, who are on trial for murder for Ahmaud Arbery. In a town that is over 50% Black, there's only 1 Black person on the jury. And the judge actually said that this seems a bit discriminatory. That is an example of how racism becomes baked into the judicial system to impact the outcomes that we're talking about. We also know that if you attend predominantly Black schools, you're less likely to get funding per student. You're less likely to obtain a job because if you have a Black sounding name, say like Rashawn. And then we also know that Black people, even when you attend an Ivy League school, you are actually have a similar rate at getting a job as a white person who attends a state university. Comparatively, a white person who attends an Ivy League school has a much higher chance. So we see that unfortunately, it's not about what people look like on paper. It's about other things. And we know that when homes are appraised, they continue to be devalued. Bottom line is this: systemic racism inhibits people's ability to actualize all aspects of the American dream. And when it comes to thinking about how reparations should be allocated and where they come from, here it goes, and I'll talk about this a little bit later as well. Over 2 billion acres of land in the United States is federal land. Federal land represents 25% of all land in the country. Anybody who owns property knows you can sell it, you can lease it, you can rent it out. That is how reparations can be paid. And talking about under Donald Trump, let's talk about that. In 2018, Donald Trump actually authorized the availability of over 2 million acres of public land in Utah. This was the largest release of public land in U.S. history at a modest rate of $25,000 an acre. This equates to $50 billion. And part of thinking about that money is money that can be allocated for programs to firmly address the root cause of this problem, which is slavery in the United States.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Ray. I want to go back to Mr. Epstein. You have 5 minutes on the opposing response and clarification to Mr. Ray.
Thank you. Let me start off with the question about is the debt. And it turns out there are many complicated debts, and they're sometimes collective, as Mr. Ray says. But if you start looking at the kind of situation, it's important to remember that there are also statutes of limitations that are imposed with respect to these rates. In every single case in which reparations has been paid to the individuals who received it. And if it turns out that you can't do it within that particular time, you do not do it at all. When you did the Japanese reparations, they were paid by the nations because it was national policies that did it. I understand all of that, but you did not do it with respect to the descendants. So the question then is there a situation why these debts are completely open-ended in terms of the way in which they go, so that at no particular point could you ever decide that they are done? And we're talking here, if you're talking about slavery, about an institution that ended in the United States about 160 years ago. And if you start talking about what happened since that time, and you're trying to figure out what did happen in there, the question you have to ask is, if you're going to start to think about this as a debt, do you start to think about some of the various programs that were made, often huge transfer programs, particularly in more recent years, as though it's a down payment with respect to that debt? And so it's not just a question of looking at that particular time. You start looking at these programs. And if you're trying to figure out the amount of wealth that has been transferred from white individuals to black individuals through a whole variety of programs, this is going to turn out to be a fairly substantial number. And if you're trying to figure out what the debt is that you're trying to liquidate, there's really no way to do it. The great tragedy about the gains that were made by individuals who owned slaves is that they destroyed the economy. They hurt everybody. They themselves got some kind of benefit, but the benefit that they got was not shared by anybody else. In fact, slavery hurt all sorts of individuals, both white and black, because it destroyed labor markets and made the overall country far less prosperous than it turned out to be. And so I don't think when you want to start about this thing, you want to treat this debt as though it's somehow a sanctified social thing. Debts are very complicated. As the time goes on, it turns out that the claim for their repayment under these sorts of situations are weaker than you might otherwise expect. And then you're trying to figure out what it is that we talk about with systemic racism being baked into the kind of system. Well, I mean, there are many cases in which there are programs that have disparate impact. But again, before you just quote a single statistic, what you have to do is to try to figure out what's going on. So if you say that, yes, well, it turns out you have an identical house in a black neighborhood that you have in a white neighborhood, and therefore they ought to appraise the same, somebody's going to come back at you and says, well, what's the rate of maintenance that you've had on this house? Then they're going to start, what's the caliber of the schools you have in the neighborhood? What's the level of crime that you start to have? And when you start to do that, you then may be able to find out kinds of situations in which it turns out that they're perfectly rational explanations apart from racism, why it is that these kinds of differences start to exist. Then when you start looking at the kinds of programs that we have today, do we count this against reparations? If you start looking at the admission standards at an Ivy League school, you find out that the number of points that you have to score on the SAT if you're white are far higher than if you're Asian, even higher still when it turns out that they are Asian people is against black people, a whole situation. Then you start looking at that, well, now then they graduate, what's going to happen? Well, again, you have to control for various things. They have weaker academic credentials going in. The question that you ask is when they're going out, what are going to be the majors? So if it turns out that your white students go into petroleum engineering and quantitative subject matters, they're going to get much higher incomes than somebody who starts to go into a liberal arts field. You have to control for these things before you start to make very strong judgments one way or another about whether or not the institutions in question have done it. Then, of course, one of the things that we said back in 1964 about racial discrimination is that the dominant form of this was intentional. And indeed, it was intentional. Now people are saying it's not intentional, it's just baked into a particular system. But also baked into the system are institution after institution and party after party who are dedicated in every way, shape, or form to eliminate the vestiges that we've had with respect to segregation. And so instead of talking about what's quote unquote baked in implicitly, we also have to speak what's baked in explicitly. And in the United States, there is no formal policy that is put into place today which is designed to perpetuate anything that was done which was wrong at any other time. And so as you start to go through all of these particular programs, it seems to me that trying to figure out how you rectify wrongs that took place 160 years ago is a dead loser. If you're trying to figure out what's going on more recently, you cannot just simply form one particular side and say it's the systematic stuff that you did is bad. You have to also look at the other side on this and figure out what the offsets and so forth are. You know, I'm old enough to remember what it was like living in the United States when Brown v. Board of Education came down. I was 11 years old at the time. And you could see the segregation. You knew everything that was going on. The transformation in American life in both the public and the private spaces has been nothing short of spectacular since that time. And so to try to say that all of this stuff is somehow or other an image because of what's been baked in, it seems to me that when we start to look at these things, it's absolutely critical that we take into account the positive achievements that have been made, give them due credit, and then try to build on those. And I think the effort to try and go back to past claims and to say it's a collective debt that is owed from 150 years ago will not work. I think if you're trying to do it on systematic racism, the claim is sufficiently fuzzy in so many ways. There's so many counterfactuals that it's not going to work at that point today. I appreciate why it is that there are things that are owed and why people are duly upset. I am certainly in favor of any institution that is private that wants to make voluntary contributions to any particular program for any reason is certainly to do so. And if Georgetown University wants to make a program which will help the descendants of slaves, by all means, they should be able to do so. But I think that in the end, we cannot find either in the situation of slavery long gone or the very complicated social patterns that we have today, sufficient grounds to have the huge transfer programs that Professor Ray has advocated.
Okay, I think we're going at this point, Chris. I think at this point we've heard both points of view. I happen to agree that we need a system that takes into account all factors. There's some arguments that I can place, particularly against the gentleman who was against reparations for Black folk. Seemed like they had no problem in giving it to Jews. Had no problem with giving it to the Japanese. They had no problem in these things. But when it comes to fairness, when it comes to us, none of those groups have suffered the murderous, bigoted activity that we have. None of those groups, even with the 6 million Jews that were killed, can compare to the millions of Africans, millions. Rwanda, 2 million. Kenya, hundreds of thousands lives have been lost to bigotry. And the resources of the richest continent in the world depleted, stolen, taken from the French, and the British, and the Belgians, and the Germans, and the Italians in Europe have become the richest folks throughout the world based on the backs of African people. They have stolen, no matter whether you're from Senegal, Cameroon, Nigeria, the theft that was taking place and is still taking place. We have the resources, but we also steep in poverty. So we've come up with a package. We will not only have to do back payment, what we need to do is to come up with some kind of system where we will stop the exploitation of people, Black people, African people, or Black Africans. And we've got to stop that and come up with a package. And that will only be a start in terms of improving the conditions, the quality of life of our folk. Business is another thing. Most of us, people of African descent, believe in democracy. We believe in free enterprise. But when we step forward to these institutions, financial institutions, to try to get money to do what we need to do for our businesses, we find that the doors are shut. You want to repay? Then give us loans, grants, whatever's available, based on our qualifications, based on our track record instead of our race. And then let's talk a little bit about quality of life. I live in a predominantly white neighborhood. Let me tell you this. Housing market here, upwards beyond 400,000 in terms of houses. This is not a ghetto. I do not live in a ghetto. I have built and structured a house that's over 3,000 square feet. But yet, when we try to do a mortgage refinance, we got almost maybe 2/3 of what the value of that property was. Why? It wasn't because of the nature of our house. It wasn't because of the amount of land that we have. Because we have a much nicer house than many of the houses that are in this particular community. It's having to do with the ethnicity of people of color. So if you want to stop the bigotry, if you want to stop the alienation, then stop the racism. Start treating us on an equal plane. I had the blessing to be able to have the training and be able to have the functional position of heading up the Commonwealth's Equal Opportunity Affirmative Action Program. And let me tell you, there's some bigotry out there. And there's some bigotry that's colored in liberal clothing. People assume and make you think they're on your side while they're emptying your pockets and treating you as if you're less than human. That's a fact. I deal with it every day. You deal with it every day. And until we meet our maker, we will still be dealing with it. So there are days to come that we will have to continue to fight. Always at the end of the program, I want to tell you something. Before we close out, number one, I'm still down at Lebanon Valley Farmers Market. We got a wonderful new owner down there, and we're doing some things. Here's some pictures. You can slow it down a little bit. You can see we got masks, we got artifacts, we got oils, we got all kinds of things. And we should look at it as a 4-foot giraffe, oils, clothing in the background. Come down and see us. We guarantee you that we will not try to make all our profits in one sale. We try to treat you fair because we want you to come back. And also, I want to mention that Maria's book is out. I think we have a copy of that, I'm not sure. But Maria has a book, Catching Every Breath. It's a beautiful book with a lot of good, solid information. Maria James Child, for those of you who may not know exactly what I'm talking about when I say Maria. A wonderful book. You can go on Amazon and get it, but it's African Americans that are getting it done, and we appreciate that. So again, we're coming right down near the end, and I want to say to you that do your research, do your homework, and look at what people are saying and what people are doing, and are they doing what they say they're going to do? But we intend that every week to bring you a subject of interest. You can give us some feedback. Let us know what you think. I'd like to know. Want to know if we're on target, or maybe there's some things we need to deal with and bring about change. But God bless you all, and may heaven smile upon you. This is your good friend and your brother, Richard James, signing off and saying so long until I see you next week. God bless. Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. And thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let's hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.